Welcome back to the Sleepy Terminal. Tonight, we'll be slowing things down to explore a gentler time in the digital age, a time when going online was a process, a ritual, and sometimes a little unpredictable. In this calm journey through the world of dial-up internet, we'll revisit the days of noisy modems, loading pages one pixel at a time, and the joy of logging in to discover a new email or chat message. Before high-speed fiber lines, before Wi-Fi and mobile data, the internet had to dial in. It arrived through your phone line, shared with your house phone, creating a distinctive sound that would become iconic. The metallic chirps, the rhythmic squeals, the sudden silence when the connection settled in. It was the sound of potential, the sound of connecting not just with a network, but with a new kind of world. Dial-up internet was more than a technology, it was an experience. It took time. You had to wait for the connection to initialize. You had to listen. You had to be patient. It was slow, yes, but in its slowness, there was something almost meditative, something gentle, something worth remembering. In this video, we're not here to marvel at speed or innovation. We're here to appreciate the quiet charm of an era that asked you to pause, to choose what you wanted to load, to savor the process. We'll take our time walking through the history of dial-up, how it worked, what it felt like, and how it subtly shaped the culture of early internet users. This was a time when the internet was not always on. It had to be requested, summoned, like a signal from another realm. You couldn't use the phone while you were connected. You often had to warn your family before logging on. I'll just be a few minutes, you might say, knowing full well it might turn into hours spent reading forum posts or exploring personal websites made with colorful backgrounds and spinning GIFs. It was an era of digital minimalism, not because people wanted it, but because bandwidth demanded it. Web pages were smaller, simpler. Images were compressed. Videos were rare. It was about making the most of what could be transmitted across a phone line. And yet, even within those limitations, people found ways to express themselves, to connect, to share. Maybe you remember it, the hiss of the modem, the thrill of logging in to AOL or MSN Messenger, the nervous joy of entering a chat room for the first time, the glow of a CRT monitor in a darkened room, the quiet ticking of time as a single photo slowly loaded from top to bottom. Or maybe you're hearing of all of this for the first time. Maybe you've never experienced a world where websites had under construction banners and every page proudly counted its visitors with a small, pixelated counter. If so, welcome to this digital archaeology, a place where we examine not just what technology did, but how it made us feel. So settle in. Let the soft rhythm of this narration carry you back, or gently introduce you to a moment in tech history that was anything but fast, but everything about connection. Not just to information, but to curiosity, to simplicity, to the kind of internet that asked for a little patience and gave back something unforgettable. This is the story of dial-up internet, a story best told slowly, quietly, and with a deep appreciation for the squeaky, static-filled road that helped us all take our first digital steps. Let's begin. Before dial-up internet arrived in homes, connecting computers to one another, or to any sort of wider network, was a slow, technical, and often exclusive endeavor. In the early days of computing, most systems stood alone. The idea of a household having an internet connection, much less using it daily, was far from reality. In the 1970s and early 80s, computers were primarily used by institutions, universities, governments, and large corporations. These machines were massive, expensive, and designed for specific tasks. Most were not networked in the way we think of it today. Instead, data was moved by hand, on magnetic tapes, punched cards, or later, floppy disks. Collaboration between machines was rare and typically localized, and data processing occurred in isolated bubbles of hardware. The first inklings of connectivity emerged through technologies like ARPANET, a project funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. It was one of the earliest attempts to connect computers over long distances. Using packet switching technology, it demonstrated that information could be broken into pieces, sent through different paths, and reassembled on the other side. But this innovation was closed off to the public and limited to a small number of researchers. It laid the groundwork, though, for something much larger to come. By the early 1980s, a new wave of experimentation began. Bulletin board systems, BBSs, started appearing in basements and spare rooms. These were rudimentary digital meeting places run by hobbyists. Using a telephone line and a modem, a user could dial into a BBS and post messages, share files, or play simple text-based games. But there was a catch. Only one person could be connected at a time. Each BBS was like a digital waiting room with one chair. Still, it was a start. Communities began to form. People learned to communicate asynchronously, leaving messages, checking back later. It felt futuristic. It was exciting, and it hinted at what was possible. Throughout the 1980s, networking continued to evolve. Commercial services like CompuServe, Prodigy, and The Source offered early forms of online interaction, from email and forums to limited forms of online shopping. These services ran on proprietary software and required specific access numbers and login credentials. For those who used them, the experience felt advanced, even magical. But they were still niche, mostly appealing to enthusiasts and professionals. Home computing was changing too. With the introduction of more affordable and user-friendly personal computers like the Commodore 64, Apple II, and later the IBM PC, families began welcoming machines into their homes. These devices were used for word processing, educational games, and simple spreadsheets. Yet most remained disconnected from any larger digital world. Modems were around, but not common. Those who had them used them for BBS access or to connect directly to another computer. The process was technical. You needed to configure your modem, know a phone number to dial, and hope your connection held. It was clunky, and it didn't always work. Sometimes you'd get a busy signal. Other times, a line noise or small wiring inconsistency would prevent the handshake from completing. Networking between machines was also limited by hardware. Ethernet cables existed, but routers and hubs were expensive. Wireless networking was still confined to labs and military use. Sharing files meant swapping disks. Collaboration meant being in the same room or mailing storage media in envelopes labeled "Handle with care." And yet, the pieces were falling into place. Technological progress marched forward, often quietly. Phone lines were everywhere. Computers were getting smaller, cheaper, more powerful. Modem speeds crept upward. Standards for networking were being developed in labs and committees, slowly coalescing into something that could scale. By the late 1980s, graphical user interfaces began to take hold. Operating systems like Windows and Macintosh made computers more accessible to non-technical users. Word processors replaced typewriters. Digital painting tools gave hobbyists a new canvas. And in tandem, modems started appearing more frequently in homes, not just in offices or universities. An entire generation was being introduced to the idea that a computer could be a companion, not just a calculator. Meanwhile, software developers began embedding hints of network capability into their programs. Some games allowed for serial link multiplayer. Early spreadsheet tools could share files more efficiently. Educational software encouraged collaboration, even if it meant kids trading disks or dialing into a friend's machine with a parental warning to not stay online too long. But it wasn't until the early 1990s that something truly transformative happened: the birth of the World Wide Web. Invented by Tim Berners-Lee, the web was a way of linking documents together using hyperlinks. It was designed to be simple, universal, and scalable, and most importantly, it could run over dial-up connections. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. A simple home computer with a phone line and a modem could access the web. You didn't need to be a tech expert or have a university login. All you needed was a dial-up provider and a little patience. Services like AOL, Earthlink, and NetZero appeared to offer just that: a bridge into the online world for the average person. It was the beginning of a new era, one where the internet wasn't just for academics or hobbyists, but for everyone. A time when kids, parents, and grandparents could all explore the same digital frontier right from their living room. Information was no longer trapped in libraries or institutions. It was on demand, albeit slowly, page by page. The world before dial-up was quieter, more isolated, more tactile. It required physical effort to share data or communicate. But in that silence, a storm was building, a networked world ready to connect, inform, and transform the way we lived. There was a certain charm to this pre-connected time, a deliberateness, a respect for the physical media. The act of loading software from a disk, printing out a letter, or dialing into a BBS was a series of intentional steps. Every connection meant something. Every file you shared had value. And then one day, someone picked up the phone, heard the screech of a modem, and the future came calling. To understand the charm and limitations of dial-up internet, it helps to know how it actually worked. At its core, dial-up internet was a clever use of existing telephone infrastructure. It didn't require new cables, complex routers, or fiber optics. It simply used the same copper wires that carried voice calls to your home. At the heart of the dial-up process was a device called a modem, short for modulator-demodulator. The modem's job was to convert digital data from your computer into analog signals that could travel across phone lines. Once those signals reached the modem on the other end, usually at your internet service provider, they were converted back into digital data, allowing your request to reach a website or remote server. When you wanted to go online, you would launch a connection tool on your computer, perhaps an AOL application or Windows built-in dial-up wizard. You would click connect, and the modem would begin its noisy handshake. This process, while often overlooked today, was a defining sound of the 1990s and early 2000s. The tones were not random. They represented communication between your modem and the ISP's modem, negotiating the best connection speed possible. You'd hear a dial tone, then a series of sharp beeps, followed by a rising squeal and a long static hiss. Eventually, if all went well, silence. That silence meant success. You were online. Dial-up speeds were modest by today's standards. The earliest modems ran at 2400 bits per second. Later, 14.4 kilobits per second modems became popular. Eventually, most users had 28.8 or 56 kilobits per second connections. To put that in perspective, a single modern photo might take several minutes to load. A video? Nearly impossible. This slowness defined the user experience. You learned to be patient. Web pages loaded line by line. Images appeared gradually, top to bottom. Watching a large JPEG come into view was like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom. You could see it forming. You could anticipate its completion. Because of these limitations, early web design prioritized simplicity. Text was king. Pages were built with basic HTML, relying on minimal graphics and straightforward navigation. Blue links, white backgrounds, and Times New Roman were the default look of the web. Animation, sound, and video were rare and often optional. The constraints of dial-up also shaped behavior. People were deliberate with their browsing. You might open a page, go make tea while it loaded, then return to read. You didn't idly scroll. You chose where to click. The process created a kind of digital mindfulness that's largely absent in today's high-speed world. There were other quirks too. Because the internet and phone lines shared the same wire, you couldn't use both at once. Trying to make a call while someone was online would result in a busy signal or a dropped connection. Many families established internet shifts, coordinating who could go online and when. Some even got a second phone line just for internet use. Internet providers of the time were numerous and varied. AOL, Earthlink, NetZero, and others competed for users with promotional discs and generous trial periods. You might find a CD in your mailbox offering 1,000 free hours of internet. These discs were ubiquitous, at grocery stores, tucked into magazines, even sent with cereal boxes. AOL in particular stood out for its all-in-one ecosystem. Its software didn't just connect you to the internet, it gave you email, chat rooms, news, weather, and even games. It was a digital living room, and many users never ventured beyond its walls. The phrase, "you've got mail," became iconic, symbolizing a new kind of connection, personal, instant, and exciting. ISPs also imposed usage models that seem foreign today. You often paid by the hour, or had a capped number of hours each month. Going over your allotted time could result in extra charges. Users became very conscious of their online minutes, often logging off quickly to conserve time. Despite these limitations, or perhaps because of them, dial-up users developed a sense of exploration. The web was smaller then. You could browse much of it in an evening. Directories like Yahoo and Alta Vista helped you find content, but it often felt like walking through a dusty library, discovering odd and personal corners of the internet. Email became a staple. Services like Hotmail and Yahoo Mail made it possible to correspond quickly, bypassing traditional mail. Emailing was a quiet revolution. It allowed people to stay in touch without the delay of postage or the formality of a phone call. Messages could be sent at any hour, answered at leisure. In parallel, instant messaging flourished. Programs like ICQ, AIM, and MSN Messenger let users chat in real time. You could see when your friends were online. You could change your away message to reflect your mood or current activity. Conversations were casual, ongoing, and often full of quirky emoticons. The dial-up era also birthed the early internet forum. Communities grew around shared interests, books, games, hobbies. Message boards like PHPBB and early Reddit-style sites allowed people to exchange thoughts, ask questions, and share advice. It was a slower form of social media, where posts lingered and discussions evolved over days, not minutes. All of this depended on your modem behaving. Connections would often drop without warning, due to a phone call, a glitch, or a network hiccup. Users became accustomed to saving their work frequently. Getting kicked offline was a common frustration, usually met with a sigh and a slow redial. Security was minimal. Few websites used encryption. Firewalls were rare in home setups. Viruses spread through email attachments, often disguised as friendly messages. Yet despite these vulnerabilities, the web felt safer, more anonymous, more private. You didn't need to use your real name. Avatars and handles were the norm. Dial-up internet was more than a technical bridge. It was a cultural shift. It turned solitary computing into a shared experience. It made the idea of being online something people aspired to. The process, though imperfect, introduced a generation to the joys and frustrations of digital life. So when we think about dial-up, we're not just remembering technology, we're remembering a pace of life. A time when waiting for a page to load wasn't annoying, it was expected. A time when the screech of a modem didn't mean frustration, it meant opportunity. It wasn't always fast, it wasn't always stable, but it was always exciting. And in its own slow, stuttering way, it brought the world to your doorstep. Living through the dial-up internet era was more than just about the technology. It was a lifestyle. It changed how people approached their free time, how they accessed information, and even how households functioned. The internet didn't simply arrive at the push of a button. It arrived with noise, time, and intention. To log on was a choice, and that choice came with rituals, limitations, and quiet joy. One of the most iconic aspects of the dial-up experience was the sound, the unforgettable modem handshake. For many, it remains one of the most nostalgic and evocative noises of the late 90s and early 2000s. That rising sequence of beeps and hisses wasn't just an auditory signal. It was a form of anticipation. The whirring melody meant your computer was reaching out, attempting to connect to something bigger. And if it succeeded, a whole world of possibilities opened up. But getting online was only the beginning. Once you were connected, you were immediately mindful of the ticking clock. Whether you were on a limited plan or just trying not to tie up the phone line for too long, your time online had to be used wisely. You often went in with a plan. Check email, download a file, look something up. There was no room for endless scrolling or browsing rabbit holes. Not because people weren't curious, but because the infrastructure didn't allow for it. This focus meant users were more intentional. They bookmarked pages religiously. They saved files to review offline. They typed URLs carefully, since mistyping one could mean several extra minutes of loading. Websites in return were designed to be lean. Graphics were kept minimal. Pages were optimized for speed, or at least for dial-up tolerance. Yet even with slow speeds, people still found plenty to do. Chatting with friends on AIM or MSN Messenger became a daily habit. Changing your away message was a form of self-expression, often poetic, humorous, or cryptic. These brief texts offered a glimpse into someone's mood or activities. Entire conversations played out through them, passively, across hours or days. For some, chat rooms were the real draw. Platforms like AOL hosted rooms for nearly every interest imaginable. You could talk with strangers about your favorite books, your latest TV obsession, or just how your day had gone. The anonymity made it easier for people to open up. Of course, it wasn't always safe, but it was exciting. A new kind of social experience. Gaming over dial-up was its own adventure. Multiplayer experiences were limited, but games like Diablo, Command & Conquer, and StarCraft managed to thrive despite the constraints. Lag was a fact of life. Matches could drop unexpectedly, but the thrill of playing with or against someone miles away made the hiccups worth it. Downloading media was an exercise in patience. A single MP3 might take 20 minutes or longer. Early file sharing services like Napster or LimeWire operated in the background while users did other things. You might set a download to begin and walk away, hoping no one picked up the phone in the meantime. Videos were even harder to manage. Streaming wasn't practical, so clips were saved, traded, and stored like precious artifacts. Meanwhile, the web itself felt more personal. So many pages were created by individuals, hand-coded with HTML, adorned with animated GIFs, colored backgrounds, and sometimes embedded MIDI music. Personal websites were digital diaries filled with thoughts, photos, and visitor counters. Guest books allowed visitors to leave short messages. These spaces were messy, sincere, and filled with personality. There was something deeply human about it all. The imperfections, the slow speeds, the broken image links, the crashes, made the experience feel lived in. Nothing about the internet felt corporate or optimized. It was a canvas, painted slowly, refreshed with care. Households had to adjust around these new routines. Families shared computers. Internet time had to be negotiated. It wasn't uncommon to hear a parent shout, "Get off the internet! I need to use the phone!" In some homes, a dedicated phone line was added just to accommodate internet use. In others, using the web meant waiting until no one else needed to make a call. The dial-up experience also carried a sense of fragility. Any disruption, a storm, a phone call, a bump to the cable, could sever the connection. You'd hear the dreaded click, followed by silence, and then the modem would begin its song again. This taught users to save often, to expect the unexpected, to remain patient. It also created moments of suspense. Would your message send before the connection dropped? Would the file finish downloading before someone called the house? Would the site load in time for your school project? These little races against time were part of the charm. And then there was the night internet. For many, logging on after dark became a ritual. The house would quiet down, the lights would dim, and the soft glow of the monitor lit the room. You'd tiptoe to the computer, careful not to wake anyone, and quietly dial in. It was your moment, peaceful, undisturbed, and private. In those hours, the internet felt like a secret garden. The dial-up experience wasn't smooth, and it certainly wasn't fast. But it was personal. It made you aware of the systems you were using. You heard them working. You saw the lag. You felt the process. Today's always-on high-speed connections are undeniably more convenient. But they lack that tactile awareness, that audible, visible sense of progress. Dial-up made you part of the machine. You participated in its rhythm. And as frustrating as it could be, it was also formative. An entire generation learned to navigate technology not with seamless interfaces, but through waiting, retrying, and reading the fine print. That generation developed patience, adaptability, and a certain reverence for what was then considered instant access. Looking back now, it all feels oddly comforting. The dial-up experience, with all its quirks and constraints, offered something modern technology rarely does: the opportunity to slow down. Dial-up internet didn't just change how we use computers, it quietly reshaped how people interacted, socialized, and lived. It wove itself into the routines of daily life, becoming a cultural phenomenon, even if no one realized it at the time. The slow, methodical process of connecting didn't just affect how we accessed information, it impacted how we related to each other, how families communicated, and how early digital communities formed. In many households, the computer with dial-up access sat in a central location, the living room, the den, or a corner of the kitchen. It wasn't a private activity. It was shared, visible, and often negotiated. Siblings had to take turns. Parents worried about tying up the phone line. Logging onto the internet often meant alerting everyone in the home. "I'm going online. Don't call anyone," became a familiar phrase. These negotiations created new household dynamics. Children had to be mindful of the time spent online. Parents, unfamiliar with the technology, sometimes hovered nearby, curious or cautious. The modem's dial tone was loud enough to catch everyone's attention. It wasn't a background process, it was an event. And that visibility extended beyond the home. In school computer labs, students waited their turn to research a project or check their email. In libraries, Terminals were booked in advance. Public access was limited but highly valued. It was a taste of something larger, a network of knowledge that was still just out of reach. Early internet access also influenced relationships. Email replaced handwritten letters for many. Instant messaging let people stay in touch in real time. Friendships formed through chat rooms and message boards. For teenagers especially, this was transformative. It offered a new space to express themselves, away from the pressures of face-to-face interaction. Romantic relationships blossomed online too, through long emails, hours of IM conversations, or shared experiences on forums. People met in fan communities, gaming servers, or even personal websites. These early connections laid the groundwork for the online dating culture we see today. Dial-up also introduced a sense of online identity. Users chose screen names, avatars, and digital signatures. These weren't just handles, they were reflections of personality, mood, or interest. You were known by your alias, not your real name. And that pseudonymity fostered creativity, honesty, and sometimes mischief. The pace of dial-up encouraged a kind of digital etiquette. You didn't flood forums with constant posts. You added to conversations thoughtfully, knowing others might not respond for hours or days. You didn't send massive emails. You were concise, careful, and deliberate. Families began to share resources online too. Recipes, medical advice, parenting tips. Early websites, often run by individuals, became lifelines for people with niche questions or rare hobbies. Message boards and listservs created micro-communities that felt intimate and supportive. Even the workplace was changed. For small businesses, dial-up meant reaching customers beyond their local area. Email transformed communication. Websites replaced printed brochures. Some early entrepreneurs used dial-up connections to launch their ventures, selling crafts, consulting, or publishing blogs. Pop culture absorbed the dial-up experience as well. The "You've Got Mail" chime became iconic, inspiring a romantic comedy and countless commercials. TV shows and movies began referencing the internet. It was no longer a niche tool. It was becoming part of the cultural conversation. And yet, all of this unfolded slowly. That slowness was more than a technical limitation. It was part of the mood. The rhythm of dial-up internet shaped how people behaved online. They were more patient, more forgiving, more present. The culture of that time also reflected the internet's novelty. There was no social media as we know it, no viral videos, no influencers. Everyone was discovering the web together, building a collective understanding of what it could be. And because of this, there was experimentation. Personal websites used blinking text and dancing GIFs. Background music autoplayed. Fonts were colorful, sometimes unreadable. It was chaotic, charming, and sincere. There were no best practices, just people trying things out. The internet was a patchwork of personal expression, and that was its strength. It didn't feel polished, it felt human. And that humanity carried into the interactions people had with one another. There were also moments of tension. Parents worried about online safety. Schools debated internet use. Debates raged about what kind of content should be allowed. The dial-up era forced people to confront these questions slowly and thoughtfully, as access was still limited and usage monitored. Over time, this grew. People began to understand the power of the web, not just for information, but for connection. Campaigns encouraged safe browsing. Schools introduced internet etiquette. Families set computer rules. But even amid the concerns, the cultural impact was undeniable. The internet was no longer a fringe idea. It was a fixture, a tool that influenced how people learned, laughed, and loved. Looking back, the social fabric of the dial-up era seems almost quaint, but it was foundational. The relationships formed, the communities built, and the habits developed during that time shaped everything that came after. It was a quieter internet, a slower internet, but also a more mindful one. And in that slowness, something remarkable happened. People found each other, not through algorithms, but through shared interests. Not for likes, but for understanding. Not instantly, but meaningfully. As we continue this journey, we'll explore how this world gave way to something faster, broader, and eventually, always on. As we moved into the early 2000s, the familiar whir and screech of the dial-up modem began to fade. The transition from dial-up to broadband internet marked not just a technological upgrade, it was a cultural shift. What had once been a deliberate, scheduled activity going online, slowly transformed into an invisible background process. The internet was no longer something you accessed, it was just there. The seeds of this shift were planted in the late 1990s with the rise of DSL, digital subscriber line, and cable internet. Unlike dial-up, these technologies use different frequencies on the same phone line or separate coaxial cables altogether, allowing for much higher speeds and, crucially, constant connectivity without tying up the family phone. For the first time, it was possible to be online and on the phone at the same time. DSL began appearing in urban areas first, promising speeds up to 1.5 megabits per second, a massive leap from 56 kilobits per second dial-up. Cable internet, which leveraged the coaxial infrastructure originally laid for television, often delivered even faster service. These speeds opened new doors. Streaming audio and video became viable. Web pages loaded nearly instantly. Suddenly, downloading a photo wasn't a task, it was instantaneous. With broadband came new expectations. People no longer waited for connections to initialize. You could jump online to look something up mid-conversation, watch a video without preloading it, or keep multiple browser tabs open without grinding your system to a halt. This seamlessness brought convenience, but also subtly altered our relationship with technology. Internet usage became more casual. The careful planning of dial-up was replaced by spontaneity. You didn't have to ration time online. You didn't have to justify being connected. The boundaries between offline and online began to blur. This transition also altered the economics of the internet. Unlimited plans became the norm. ISPs shifted to monthly subscriptions with flat rates. AOL, once the dominant player with its walled garden model and pay-by-the-hour service, struggled to adapt. Many of the early ISPs either went under or merged into larger telecom companies. The broadband revolution didn't happen overnight. In rural areas, dial-up remained the only option for years. Infrastructure limitations meant some communities stayed tethered to modems well into the late 2000s. But gradually, broadband access expanded. Schools, libraries, and businesses upgraded. And with it, new norms took root. Web design evolved rapidly in response. Sites became more visually rich. Images, animations, and videos became commonplace. Flash technology enabled interactive content and streaming. News websites updated in real time. Shopping became more dynamic. Banking went digital. And slowly, the web turned from a collection of static pages into a living, breathing platform. Social media began to emerge around this time. Platforms like Friendster, MySpace, and eventually Facebook relied on faster connections to facilitate real-time updates, photo sharing, and messaging. These platforms thrived in a broadband environment. The idea of being always online no longer felt novel, it was becoming expected. Software development followed suit. Programs that once shipped in boxes with CDs became downloadable. Updates moved online. Cloud computing emerged. Even gaming began shifting toward online experiences, downloading patches, connecting to multiplayer servers, browsing digital storefronts. Dial-up simply couldn't keep up. Streaming media is perhaps the clearest example of dial-up's obsolescence. Services like YouTube launched in 2005, assuming a base level of broadband capability. Netflix began shifting from DVDs to digital distribution. Podcasts grew in popularity. In a broadband world, content could be delivered continuously, effortlessly, and in high quality. The mobile revolution added another layer. With the rise of smartphones, connectivity was no longer tied to a home computer. Mobile broadband meant the internet traveled with you. The rituals of dial-up, the sound, the wait, the shared experience, were replaced by silent, immediate access in the palm of your hand. Looking back, the fall of dial-up was inevitable, but it didn't happen without resistance. Some users clung to it out of necessity, others out of habit. There was a certain comfort in the familiar rhythm of connection. But eventually, the sheer speed and convenience of broadband won out. And yet, even as it faded, dial-up left a lasting legacy. It taught users to be patient. It introduced millions to the digital world. It showed that communication, information, and creativity could be shared instantly if you were willing to wait a moment. There's something poetic in that slowness, something grounding. Dial-up wasn't just about being connected, it was about the process of connecting, a conscious choice, a moment of anticipation. Today, we rarely think about how we connect. The process is invisible. seamless. But perhaps there's value in remembering what came before. The hum of the modem, the page that took a minute to load, the excitement of logging in, the small rituals that made the early internet feel like an experience, not just a tool. And so the fall of dial-up wasn't a failure. It was a stepping stone, a bridge between eras. The gentle crackle of copper wires carried us into the digital age. And even as we embrace high-speed fiber and wireless everything, there's still a quiet corner of memory where that dial tone lingers. In the next segment, we'll explore how this legacy lives on in today's culture and the surprising ways the dial-up era still echoes in our digital lives. Though dial-up internet has long since vanished from most homes, its influence lingers quietly in the background of our modern digital lives. It lives in the metaphors we use, the designs we recall, and the habits we still carry with us, whether we're aware of them or not. The earliest generation of internet users, those who first heard the modem's electronic chirps and squeals, were pioneers in a world that hadn't yet defined itself. They were learning how to communicate, navigate, and express themselves online in real time. The decisions they made, the sites they built, and the communities they formed created templates for what the web would become. Many of the foundational aspects of internet culture took root in that era. The use of handles or screen names as digital identities, the emphasis on message boards and community threads, the importance of personal websites maintained with care and passion. These were blueprints for the more sophisticated platforms that would come later, like Reddit, Discord, or even modern social media. There's also a visual nostalgia that persists. The soft gray backgrounds, blocky navigation menus, blinking banners, and early pixelated fonts. Designers today sometimes borrow these retro aesthetics in their creations. It's not uncommon to find a modern web app or mobile game paying homage to the rough-hewn beauty of 90s internet visuals. Even the modem handshake sound finds its way into remixes, videos, and audio collages, symbols of a slower, quieter era. But beyond design and aesthetics, there's something deeper, a sense of digital mindfulness. The slowness of dial-up taught people to be intentional with their time online. There was no doom scrolling, no background noise of constant content. Each web visit, each click was a moment of choice. This quality, while often lost today, is being sought after again in modern digital minimalism movements and mindfulness tech spaces. People are starting to miss the idea of less. Less speed, less noise, less pressure to be everywhere, all at once. In that way, the dial-up era serves as a kind of template for thoughtful reconnection, how to engage with the internet more purposefully, more slowly, and with a sense of appreciation. In terms of legacy, even the idea of being offline has its roots in the dial-up age. Back then, you were either online or you weren't. There was no in-between. That boundary gave clarity to interactions. Today, we are always online, but sometimes wish we weren't. There's a certain envy in recalling a time when going online was a destination, not a default. And let's not forget the personal nature of early internet use. Much of the content was created by individuals, for individuals. Blog posts, GeoCities pages, hand-built fan sites. They were expressions of identity, unshaped by algorithms or monetization. They weren't optimized for SEO. They were optimized for sharing joy, knowledge, or curiosity. That spirit still exists today in small pockets of the internet, in niche blogs, handmade websites, and quiet community forums. In some ways, dial-up's limitations were also its strengths. Because the internet was slower and more constrained, it was harder to fall into distraction. Fewer notifications, fewer demands. It gave users space to breathe. Modern platforms try to simulate that now, through digital detoxes, focus modes, or minimal interfaces, but they're recreations of what dial-up did by default. The nostalgia people feel toward dial-up isn't just about the sound or the speed, it's about the mood. The dim room lit by a bulky monitor, the hum of a computer fan, the excitement of discovering a new website, the act of writing a message and knowing the recipient wouldn't see it instantly, and that was okay. That analog pace nurtured a kind of patience and resilience. You learned to troubleshoot. You accepted delays. You didn't expect perfection. There was joy in the glitches, personality in the errors, and humor in the hiccups. It felt real, tangible. Today's internet is dazzling, seamless, and infinitely fast. And yet, in its relentless efficiency, it sometimes feels hollow. Dial-up, with all its imperfections, felt more personal, like the difference between a handwritten letter and a text message. One takes longer, but stays with you longer too. As time marches forward, and as younger generations grow up with fiber optics and gigabit speeds, dial-up might seem quaint, like a rotary phone or a floppy disk, but it remains a vital part of the internet story, a reminder of how far we've come and how much we've changed in the process. And for those who lived through it, the memory lingers, not just as a piece of history, but as a feeling, a mood, a sound, the ghost of a connection that asked you to wait, to listen, and to appreciate every slow, sputtering moment of discovery. In our final segment, we'll close this journey with a reflection, a quiet farewell to the dial-up era and all the little ways it helped shape the digital world we now call home. As we bring this quiet reflection to a close, let's take a gentle breath and sit with the memory of a simpler time, a time when the internet wasn't just a utility, but an event, when going online meant waiting, listening, and being present for each moment of connection, when curiosity unfolded slowly and discovery came one web page at a time. The dial-up era wasn't perfect, but it gave us something meaningful, an introduction to digital life that felt intentional, human, and quietly profound. It didn't rush us, it asked us to slow down. And in that stillness, we learned patience, problem solving, and the joy of exploration. There was something almost meditative about logging on late at night, the house dark and still, the soft hum of your computer a companion in the silence. In those early hours, wrapped in the glow of a screen and the mystery of the web, the world felt just a little more magical. Even today, in a world where everything is fast and frictionless, echoes of that era remain. They live in the way we remember the sounds, the way we talk about logging on, or the way we smile when we think of waiting for an image to slowly load, line by line. So as you rest or drift off, let this story of dial-up settle in like a soft memory. Let it remind you that even the slowest connections can spark the deepest changes. That even a static laden signal, crawling through copper wire, can carry the dreams of a generation. Thank you for joining me on this journey, for taking a pause with me, for remembering not just the technology, but the feeling. Until next time, rest well, and may your memories connect as warmly as those old dial tones once did.